Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel. I'm a professor of migration studies, and this is a channel about all things migration. Now today we are going to be talking about fair and ethical recruitment within the context of labor migration. Now, given the context of labor migration more generally, migrants are often at higher risks of labor exploitation and a number of different issues around fair and ethical recruitment, although this is not an issue that is only for migrants, of course, but I will be talking about it now within that context. I want to talk about some of the different issues in this area. What I will do is give some key definitions, some terminology, and then I also want to go through a number of challenges that migrants specifically face, and then talk about some key global norms that are set up around this area that we need to make sure that we are adhering to and taking care of. So, of course, in today's global economy, workers are increasingly looking for work outside of their countries of origin. And in a number of other videos on this channel, I talk about, the main countries of origin, main countries of destination, where migrants are going, and, labor migration also more specifically. So, estimates indicate that there are close to 170 million migrant workers globally, and of these, a bit under half, so 41%, are women. Low-skilled workers in particular are at risk of facing abuses throughout the recruitment process, often based on, their lack of networks or information or language skills. So there are also some of the migrants that are more at risk of labor exploitation. There are a number of potential challenges associated with labor migration in this regard, all right? So if migration is not well governed, labor migration can pose a number of significant policy challenges. So often policies regulating the flows of migrant workers are insufficiently aligned with labor market needs, reducing the potential for migration to efficiently respond to the demand for skills and workers. For low-skilled workers in particular, there are often few pathways for regular migration, really despite the need for workers at all different skill levels. Migrant workers also rarely benefit from full equal treatment in areas such as Social Security coverage compared with national workers, and temporary migration can pose a specific challenge for equality of treatment in areas like access to social protection or other rights and things like that. For low-skilled migrants in particular, they're often in jobs that are poorly regulated sectors like construction, agriculture, and domestic work, and where they're often specifically exposed to abuse and exploitation, as well as occupational safety and health hazards. And these are some of the key things that we're going to talk about today. So also, private employment agencies are key actors in matching workers with jobs abroad. But if they're left unchecked, then we definitely see that unscrupulous agencies can resort to fraudulent and definitely exploitative recruitment practices. And of course, there are a number of other issues that may also come up. So to avoid many of these challenges, we need strong institutional structures and frameworks, and the importance of addressing challenges in the recruitment process as it concerns migrant workers is well established in international law. Protection of migrant workers needs to be ensured throughout the migration life cycle. So what I mean by that is before they actually migrate, during the migration or when they are in the country of destination, and then if they decide to return, also upon return. Now, there is a complex landscape of actors and regulations on recruitment, but the focus has largely been on private recruitment agencies, but public employment services also play an important role in the recruitment of migrant workers, particularly in a bilateral context. So when we're talking about people moving from one country just to another country, and these are often even agreements between different countries. Now, let's first start with defining ethical recruitment and fair recruitment. So the International Organization for Migration defines ethical recruitment as the hiring of workers lawfully and in a fair and transparent manner with respect to their dignity and human rights. And the International Labor Organization says that, a recruitment process is only fair when carried out within the law and in line with international labor standards, but most importantly, when it respects human rights. So you can see that human rights are a really important component here. Now, we often see a number of common violations of human and labor rights during the recruitment process. Now, some of these are, for example, the charging of recruitment fees to workers, the underpayment or non-payment of wages, deception with regard to contracts, working and living conditions, sometimes the retention of identity documents. Often employers will actually keep the passports of the migrant workers, for example. The restriction of freedom of movement, also of people within the country. Sometimes also physical and sexual violence, different types of threats and abuse, the lack of access to justice and dispute resolution mechanisms when there is a problem, and often also the recruitment of workers into unsafe or hazardous work that don't have the necessary precautions. Now, of course, these are just some of the main ones. Of course, there are others. This is not an exhaustive list. Now, there is quite a decent international governance framework on fair and ethical recruitment. First, if we look at the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, within SDG 10 on the reduction of inequality, we see the target 10.7 dealing specifically with responsible and well-managed migration policies. And within that, there's a specific indicator that is tasked with assessing recruitment costs for migration. So this could be costs in many different regards. So the recruitment service fees paid to agents or agencies or brokers, document costs, transportation costs, information payments. So looking at all of these and who pays and how much they are. Within also the Global Compact for Migration, Objective 6 of the GCM is to facilitate fair and ethical recruitment and safeguard conditions that ensure decent work. So you can see it's not only coming up in the SDGs, but also coming up in the Global Compact for Migration. Now, there are a number of specific actions that are dealt with within the Global Compact with regard to the recruitment and decent work. So here, some of them that I will explain are to promote the signature, ratification, accession, and implementation of relevant international instruments related to international labor migration, labor rights, and decent work, to build on existing bilateral, sub-regional, and regional platforms, to improve the regulation of public and private recruitment agencies and eliminate recruitment fees and the related costs. And now this is specifically for the migrant worker. It is fine if the employer is paying these recruitment fees, but the migrant worker themselves should not be paying these fees. It also talks about establishing partnerships with relevant stakeholders to ensure migrant workers have written contracts and access to redress mechanisms, to enact and implement national laws to sanction human and labor rights violations, to enhance the capacity for labor inspectors to better monitor recruitment, and to strengthen recruitment processes, including the right to change employers. Another is to take measures to avoid documentation retention by the employer. So I was explaining that before, that some employers will actually take passports, for example, from their workers so that they are not actually even able to leave the country if they would like to leave the employer or leave the country. And to ensure that the same rights for migrant workers are there as for native workers, regardless of the sector, to access complaints and redress mechanisms so that if there is a problem, that migrant workers have the option to go somewhere and get some kind of redress for the issues they're having. Another point is to review the relevant national labor laws, employment policies, and programs to ensure that they include considerations of the specific needs and contributions of women migrant workers. So we do know that a lot of the issues that migrants face can also be gendered. I have some other videos on the channel also specifically on gendered aspects of migration. And finally, to align policies and programs with the international labor principles and the IOM International Recruitment Integrity System, which I will also come back to and explain in a little bit more detail. So we have a number of different core international instruments related to recruitment. So we have a lot of different conventions here. We have international standards for forced labor. We have international standards on migrant workers. We have international standards related to employment and policy promotion. And then we have also sector-specific legal instruments, things that specifically deal with domestic workers or maritime workers. So we have all of that in the toolbox. It's now just whether or not countries are actually using them. We also have these non-binding normative frameworks. The International Labor Organization actually has the general principles and operational guidelines for fair recruitment. And then the International Organization for Migration has also the IRIS system on ethical recruitment. So one of these is really establishing the policy framework for fair and ethical recruitment, and the other one is dealing with specific operational aspects to fair and ethical recruitment. Now, let me just quickly go through these key guiding principles on fair and ethical recruitment that countries, labor inspectorates, others really need to make sure that they are following, that they are implementing in their everyday work. So there are 13 guiding principles here. The first is that recruitment should adhere to internationally recognized human rights, including those expressed in international labor standards. So these are things like freedom of association, collective bargaining, the prevention of forced labor and child labor, or the elimination of discrimination. All right, it's already a key starting point. The second is to respond to labor market needs without lowering labor standards, wages, or working conditions. So really making sure that there's decent work here. So one of the ways that countries can do this is to make it very easy to recruit labor from abroad, but make sure that the people that are recruited from abroad are being paid the same wage as a local worker and are working under the same conditions as a local worker. Now, the third guiding principle is that recruitment laws and policies should apply to all workers, labor recruiters, and employers. So these are really standards that need to be across the board. The fourth is that policies and practices should be in place to promote efficiency, transparency, and protection in the recruitment process. So an example of this is the mutual recognition of skills and qualifications. So this is one of the things that we see being problematic in many countries, that migrants can go from one country to another, but their skills and their diplomas, for example, are not necessarily recognized in that country of destination. And there needs to be a lot more done there to make these skills recognized much more quickly, much more easily, to be assessed quickly so that those people can actually work to their full capacity. So an example of this would be making sure that nurses already have certification that they can use to work in the EU, for example, or that a country just gives an exam to nurses, for example, that shows their competency and qualification, and as long as they pass that exam, they can work in that country. So these are just some examples of how this can be implemented. The fifth guiding principle is that recruitment activities should be regulated, and this could be, for example, through labor inspection. It could be through standardized registration, licensing, or certificate systems, and measures to address abuses in the recruitment process are in place. Now, the sixth guiding principle is that recruitment across international borders should respect applicable national laws, regulations, employment contracts, applicable collective agreements, and adhere to relevant international principles and labor standards. So this is bringing it to the fore here, a number of these international agreements, conventions that we already have set out that just need to be put into practice. The seventh guiding principle is that no recruitment fees and costs should be charged to workers. So as I mentioned before, it is okay for there to be recruitment costs, but these should not be paid by workers. They need to be paid by employers. Now, employment contracts should be clear and transparent and lie within national laws. So they need to, for example, provide the location of work, the requirements within the work, the tasks expected, and it needs to be provided prior to departure and in the relevant language. So someone should not be presented with a contract in a language that they do not understand, and the working conditions or living conditions and the salary all needs to be stated very clearly in this contract. The ninth principle is that workers' agreements to the terms and conditions of recruitment employment should be voluntary and free from deception or coercion. So, this is really just that workers are having freedom of choice in contracts that they take up or do not take up. The 10th guiding principle is that workers should have access to free, comprehensive, and accurate information regarding their rights and the conditions to their recruitment and their employment. And these things should often be just directly in their contracts, as I already mentioned, in a language that they can understand. The 11th guiding principle is that workers should be free to move within or to leave a country, and their identity documents should never be confiscated, destroyed, or retained. So they need to be able to move freely within the country that they're in. They shouldn't be forced to be only in a specific encampment area, for example, and they need to always have access to their documents. They should not be held by an employer, for example. The 12th guiding principle is that workers should be free to terminate their employment, change employer, or to return to their country of origin. So they need to have the rights to do any of these things within their contract. Workers should also have access to free or affordable grievance and other dispute resolution mechanisms and effective remedies where appropriate. So, for example, if a worker's wages were withheld and they think this has been done unlawfully, they need to have someone that they can go to report this to try to get access to their back pay and their wages. So these are the 13 key general guiding principles for fair and ethical recruitment as stated by the ILO, and these are the things that should be guiding countries in implementing fair and ethical recruitment for their own migrant workers, whether these are workers in other countries or workers that are coming to their country. So whether or not we're talking about emigration or immigration, these are the guiding principles that we should be upholding. Now, of course, if you have more questions, I'll make sure to post these general principles and also the IOM ERA standards in the description below. I'll add some additional information there in case you would like to know more about these areas, or if you are even working on these as governments or international organizations. Of course, also feel free to add questions and comments, and we will definitely try to get to those. Now, if you found this video useful, of course, like it, feel free to share it around, use it as much as you can to be as useful as possible. And of course, if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the videos that we upload on a regular basis on a number of different migration issues. And I definitely hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.